Welcome to DBC. Today we are beginning with a new book, which is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And today we'll just cover the first two chapters, which have a lot of good information, and we'll hop right into it. Chapter 1 is called Giving from the Heart. And the first distinction that he makes, since this is a book about communication, a specific type, nonviolent, is that Rosenberg considers communication to be both speaking and listening as well. So the listening piece as well is a form of communication. What are we communicating while we're listening, or not so much listening? And then a key idea at the very beginning is that when we focus on what is observed, felt, and needed, rather than on diagnosing or judging, we can discover a deeper level of communication with more compassion. So these observations, feelings, and needs will come up again and again. And he gives a great metaphor at the beginning of a story. And he says that there's a man who is on all fours at night under a street lamp, and he's searching for something, kind of scurrying about. And a police officer walks by, and he asks him, "Hey, what are you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm looking for my car keys." The man answered, and he appeared a little intoxicated or inebriated at the time. The police officer asks him, "Oh, did you drop them here?" "No," answered the man. "I dropped them in the alley over there." And he saw the police officer's baffled expression, and he hastened to explain himself. He says, "But the light is much better out here under the street lamp." So we want to keep this image, this metaphor in mind as we explore the process of nonviolent communication and its use. What are we focusing on? So back to those three things, the nonviolent communication, or NVC. I'll just use the term NVC as an abbreviation for nonviolent communication. He also says that people, since he originally wrote the book, use the term compassionate communication as opposed to saying nonviolent. Like, so what is it? It's not this, but what actually is it? So compassionate communication, NVC. Anyways, so step one is to observe what is actually happening in a situation, to articulate this without introducing judgment or evaluation. So a good way that I heard at a workshop once working on this is to imagine that there's like a security camera in a room and just say, what would the camera see? Is a good way to observe what's actually happening as opposed to bringing in judgments or evaluations. Step one. Step two, state how we feel. These are the actions. That's always going to be an I feel X when I observe this Y. Step three, state our needs. What needs do we have? So the assumption here is that we do have needs, and it's important to not be falsely needless. And then a very specific request, which is obviously different than a demand or a command. For example, you could say, "Felix, when I see two balls of dirty socks under the coffee table and another one next to the television, also dirty, I feel irritated because I need more order in the rooms that we share together. Would you be willing to put your socks in your room or in the washing machine instead?" So, what do we see? Soiled socks on the coffee table and by the TV. How do I feel? I feel irritated because, and then I need order in the rooms we share in common. And then a request. So no, it's not a command. It's not put your socks in the other room. It's would you be willing to? So there's a difference there, right? And so the idea here is that it's about expressing, so the verbal, and then also receiving empathetically. And then there's a thing that, an underlying belief in the book that he doesn't say explicitly, but that our natural state is one of compassion, and this is blocked by evaluations and judgments. Now, that's chapter 1. Chapter 2 is called Communication That Blocks Compassion, so blocks our natural state of being. And he refers to these types of communications as life-alienating communication. So they separating us from others. And there are 4 main ones that he mentioned so far. So the first one is moralistic judgments. For example, you're too selfish, or she's lazy, or that's a prejudiced way of thinking. Any of these, he has a great way of putting this, is any of these sort of judgments they are tragic expressions of our own values and needs. And when he says that word tragic there, it's interesting because those values and needs are important and they have a place to be expressed, but the tragic expression is that, telling someone that they're selfish or lazy or prejudiced just is life alienating. It puts a wall up, separates us, right? And so he says that this leads to violence. At the root of much, if not all, violence is a kind of thinking that attributes the cause of conflict to a wrongness in someone else's adversaries. Think about war. Like, what war is not fought because those guys or women over there are doing something wrong against our values, right? So the idea is that there's a different path or a different way of communicating to address that. So moral suggestions number 2, comparisons. So this is a form of judgment, he says. And he mentions this book that's a great title and a great idea on the book. It's called How to Make Yourself Miserable, which is awesome. Number 3 is denying responsibility. So the idea, communication is life-alienating when it clouds our awareness that we are responsible for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. And he says, be aware of any inclination that you might have to use the word have to or make me feel, or saying things like, oh, I do that because I'm X, because I'm an impatient person, or because I'm an alcoholic, I do these things. So the goal here is to replace language that implies a lack of choice with language that acknowledges choice, because all of those things like, oh, I have to, or you made me feel, you imposed on me this feeling, or I'm just this way, like it's like, oh, I don't have a choice, sorry, whatever I do now is excused, therefore, right? 4th type of life-alienating communication is to communicate our desires as demands, which we talked about in the first chapter. And then the goal here is to move from thinking moralistically to becoming in contact with our feelings and needs, as well as observations, I guess, is the first thing that always happens. And this is a pretty controversial thing, I guess maybe for myself personally, growing up studying philosophy and the importance of morality, which I still believe. But it's like morality has this way of being life-alienating. And if we can really step back and sort of simplify, this is Rosenberg's claim so far, by simply just stating as the first chapter 1, what do we observe, how do we feel, and what do we need? And then by, of course, making a request as opposed to demand. That are the first 2 chapters. We're going to continue. This is a great book, and we'll see you next time.